Welcome to another hour of In Deep. Hey there, I'm Angie Coiro. I'm going to take a little survey here before we get started on this hour's topic. How many of you, show of hands please, belong to unions? A few hands, not as many as I would like to have seen, but that is not a big surprise because union membership in the U.S. is at near record lows. It wasn't always like this. I mean, unions came of age in this country following kind of a 1-2 punch. First, there was the Gilded Age, which was kind of the blueprint for today's financial picture. A lot of money concentrated in very few hands, and the workers were pretty much on the losing end of the deal there. You danced according to the master's tune or you didn't work. Now, that was followed by a long period of money for even fewer people, the Depression. And the two of those together taught the coming generations that there was value in banding together to assure basic decency in the workplace. And what does basic decency mean? It means safety. It means health care coverage, clean working conditions, no kids working on industrial lines, livable hours with paid overtime. And if you like the weekends, you can thank the unions for that because there didn't used to be one. But that's in the increasingly distant past, just like the concept of people shedding their blood in the streets to defend their right to organize. That was the reality. But it's kind of forgotten now, and the American ideal is something of a pretender. The American imagination has seized the image of the self-made millionaire, the Mitt Romneys, the one percenters. And they work very, very hard to cultivate the delusion that you can be just like them if you work hard enough, if you work hard enough. The breaks are all there for you to have, the opportunities all there for you to have, and if you don't make it, it's your own tough luck, it's your own responsibility. And if you don't think that has caught on, remember in the Republican presidential debate, there was that question about whether people who couldn't afford health insurance should just die? And the Tea Partiers in the audience cheered the question. These are people with mortgages underwater, their unemployment benefits running out, their kids moving back in with them because they can't find work, and yet they have swallowed the lie that it's up to the individual to give him or herself the best in life. We don't need unions. Now, the anti-union sentiment is winning in legislatures across the country. The right-to-work measure that just became law in Indiana is pending in other states as well. Another one popped up Thursday, the first legislative move in Minnesota to become a right-to-work state. So in a few minutes, Steve Early is going to join us here in the studio to help assess what needs to be done to fire up the union cause. But let's welcome David Dayen first. He's rounding up the latest legislative developments, writing for Calitics and Firedoglake. David, it is so good to have you back. Welcome.
Good to hear from you again, Angie. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, you were the go-to guy on this because, of course, you've been writing on a lot of labor topics for Firedoglake and in some of your other work as well. One of your columns for Firedog says that Arizona's proposed anti-union laws are worse than Wisconsin's. It's disturbing that we have so many anti-union laws to compare from state to state now. But let's start with Arizona right at the top of the alphabet. What's going on there?
Well, as we know, Wisconsin, in a very celebrated exchange, pushed through some anti-union laws last year, and that were mainly geared towards public employees. And it was stripping most collective bargaining rights from those public employees. And they accepted police and fire from that, mainly because police and fire, some of them are Republican and some of them supported Walker's campaign. So Walker being the governor of Wisconsin. So that was that little gambit. But anyway, that passed through. Well, what we have in Arizona, where there's also sort of a trifecta, the Republicans control both houses of the legislature and Jan Brewer's the governor, they're going even well beyond what they did in Wisconsin. First of all, it would strip all collective bargaining laws, this particular legislation. And in addition, it does not exempt anybody. It does not exempt police, does not exempt firefighters. And all public employees would be stripped of their rights to collectively bargain under the proposed Arizona law. It also has the inability to do what is called dues checkoff, which allows unions to pick up their union dues by just subtracting them from their paychecks. Mm-hmm. And it also abandons, I think it bans release time, which enables union members to work on union activities during company hours. So it's basically an effort to bust these unions entirely. In fact, the person at the Goldwater Institute, which is the think tank, the corporate-backed think tank that is pushing this through in Arizona, said pretty explicitly, we want to make it so that unions really aren't helpful to the worker, and the worker will stop paying into the union. I mean, that's pretty much the design, and he said it out loud.
Wow, he gets points for it. He definitely gets points for honesty for a change.
Absolutely. That is the design. It's to break public unions in Arizona.
Well, what does that tell us about the diminishing strength of these unions? Because once upon a time, if you wanted to be a politician, you better get the endorsement of the unions.
Absolutely, and that's, that may be true on the Democratic side. It certainly wasn't true on the Republican side, and with these Republican-led legislatures, after the sort of Tea Party-backed success in the 2010 elections, these states that have pretty much a full hold on the legislature, the governor's mansion, they're actually responding to what you just said. They know that union money and muscle is important in elections, especially for Democrats, and so what they're doing is they're trying to diminish that power. And if they get rid of enough unions, they feel like they have gained a major advantage, and then what money is left to fund elections? It's largely corporate money. So that runs to their benefit. So I think that's pretty much the strategy, is to diminish it. And of course, unions have been, falling in stature for about 70 years now. I mean, ever since the Taft-Hartley Act of 1946. So, I think in the 50s, the 40s and 50s, you were looking at about 30% union density in this country. Now you're down to about 12, I think. Mm-hmm. Even though union membership went up slightly in raw numbers last year, it went down slightly in terms of a percentage of the total workforce. So, these are not good times for unions. And even though the Wisconsin uprising, occasioned a backlash, so that labor sort of played into the national consciousness a little more, the damage is done. I mean, maybe in Wisconsin they lost a couple battles, and maybe they'll lose one again if Scott Walker gets recalled. But they won the war. I mean, the law went through, and over time there will be less of a benefit from unions to draw from on the part of Democrats, and that's really the goal here, is to cut off the major source of funding in state elections.
Talking to David Dayen about what's going on around the country in legislatures, large and small, having to do with unions. I'll tell you what worries me, David, is that presumably the people who put Republicans in force around the country, be it on the state level or on the federal level, knew what they were voting for, and that this is indeed the will of the people.
Yeah. You definitely have seen a backlash to this, and I alluded to it before. You saw it in Wisconsin. You saw it in Ohio, where they were fortunate enough to have the ability to put together a referendum. And so Ohio's anti-union law last November was roundly defeated at the polls, showing that unions still have popular support, at least if you break down the specific issue and you're talking about worker rights. So there is still some support there, but there's some structural barriers they have to get through. And if the Republicans control all the aspects of the state legislature and the governor's mansion, they're going to be able to push a lot of these laws through, because there just aren't as many minority rights at the state level. It depends. It goes from state to state. But, even though there may be more popular support just because of the raised awareness and consciousness around the country, particularly in the Midwest, that didn't help us in Indiana, for example, where right to work passed just this week.
Yeah, in fact, people saw the writing on the wall with Mitch Daniels quite some time ago. This is, clearly he made his aims public, and he's willing to successfully push this through. How many other states are on the brink of pulling a Mitch Daniels, of pulling in Indiana? How much more of this do you think is going to spread?
It's unclear. I know that just today in Minnesota, Republican lawmakers proposed a ballot measure to put right to work on the ballot. Now let's explain what right to work is. Right to work means that, and another word for it is open shop. You, as a worker, you are allowed to work for a company, whether or not they are unionized, without having to pay union dues. So it creates this huge free rider problem where people can get all the benefits of a union without having to pay for it. And over time, it crushes the union because the union cannot afford to have all of these free riders running around and continue to fund their operations. And a lot of people on the left and in the labor movement call it right to work for less, because what we've seen over the years is that states, and there are 23 of them now, that have right to work laws inevitably have lower wages. There's almost a direct relationship, and it stands to reason. When you have less union density, when you have less union membership, when you have less workers collectively bargaining on their behalf, you ruin their leverage, and you end up with lower wages as a result, because management can simply push through the wages that they want. So after that brief explanation of right to work, Indiana, as I said, was the 23rd state in the country. Most of them are in the West and the South. The reason that Indiana was so important is that it was the first state in the industrial Midwest to actually pick up a right-to-work law. In Minnesota, they're going to try it with a ballot measure because Mark Dayen, the governor, is actually a Democrat and wouldn't stand for a right-to-work law. So they're going to try to put it on the ballot and try to get, there's even a law here or a proposed ballot measure, I should say, in California that would not be right to work, but it would the thing I mentioned, dues checkoff before.
Right.
It would eliminate dues checkoff. It would they call it paycheck protection. I call it paycheck deception. But you would not be allowed as a union to use the paycheck process and deduct your member benefits. And it just creates this large hassle where it's dead simple to just use the weekly, bi-weekly paycheck process to extract dues. But if you don't, then you have to sort of come up with this entire other hierarchy. It's a way to bleed unions essentially of money, so that they have to spend all these funds on trying to figure out how to do their accounting rather than spending it on helping their workers.
But it's really ironic in the wake of the Citizens United decision that